Oh, good, you're here. You're just in time for another Collection Connection, the game that's just an excuse to talk about records. This past Monday, over on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel, my brother Plastic Eric made a rare for us trip back to the 1960s with Stand, the fourth studio release from Sly and the Family Stone. I'm really only familiar with some of their bigger hits, and I've never taken in one of their albums from beginning to end before, so I'll talk about that experience first, and then move on to a seemingly unrelated album from my own collection that shares some facet, quirk, or piece of trivia with that record. Today, that's going to be the explosive 1979 debut from the English post-punk band Gang of Four, called Entertainment. The challenge to you is to figure out what the connection is, and put your guess in the comments, along with anything else you might have to say about either of these bands or records, or even what you would connect them to from your own music collection. And good news, I don't really know a thing about either of today's records, so you won't really need to know a thing about them either to sort out the connection. The first correct guess will earn a shout out in my brother's next video. But first, let's officially reveal the connection between the prior pair of albums, those being When I Was Born for the Seventh Time from Corner Shop and Stand from Sly and the Family Stone. The connection is that both albums featured songs that were recontextualized for commercials. They were used. Eric talked about the song Good Shit being relabeled Good Stuff for a series of Target ads, or maybe a single Target ad. Sort of took his word for that one. And Toyota featured Everyday People from Sly and the Family Stone, kind of making it about, I guess, being blue collar or something like that. And so that was the connection. Nobody got it. And so with that, I think we can move on with the show. All right then, let's do this thing. Eric talked about Stand from Sly and the Family Stone. I certainly know of Sly and the Family Stone, and I know some of their songs, but Sly and the Family Stone, along with all that early 70s, or late 60s in this case, but I mostly think about it as early 70s funk. I've always thought I could go for some Curtis Mayfield, or some Sly and the Family Stone, or some, I don't know, Gap Band, Ohio Players, Parliament Funkadelic, and whenever I encounter those songs in the wild, they always sound really good to me. But then when I sit down and sort of give them my full attention, they feel like they lack something. I'm not sure how to describe it, to the point where it's never made me want to go out and actively collect any of these bands, even though sometimes it feels like it really hits the spot. I'm generally looking for like horns, a horn section that like rips your face off. I think that is I have this image of funk in my head that's like Prince's Sexy MF, that is very sort of James Brown, in its insistence, and is just in like full attack mode. And Sly and the Family Stone has a couple of those tracks on there, but mostly feels a little more laid back, and they translate a little easier into things like Kool and the Gang and Casey and the Sunshine Band from a little bit later in the 70s that leaned more into the pop side of it. And of course, funk kind of gave way to disco, which I find a lot more palatable. I would rather listen to Donna Summer or the Bee Gees in the end than these early funk bands. And I don't know if it just takes sort of, extended exposure or what, because I feel like I should like it, and it's not that I don't like it, but it just never wows me the way I feel like kick-ass funk is going to wow me. And so it was good, it was fine. I do know Everyday People, the song, and I thought like Sex Machine was pretty close to that, kind of just a hard funk workout, but a lot of it was a lot more user-friendly, leaning more to me on the pop side, a little bit of psychedelia in there, and so it wasn't like real stomping funk to me most of the time, which seemed like that should make it fine. and yet the maybe it's the political nature. That's the other thing, kind of about like a band like Casey and the Sunshine Band, is that they were not about politics at all. And so this is going to come as irony when I start to talk about Gang of Four, I suppose. But yeah, I'm thinking I can probably keep this relatively brief because I'm not super familiar with either of these acts or specific albums, and so I don't really have a lot of information that's already in my head. And it was really just about kind of listening to both. And so maybe I'll just go ahead and move on to the connection, which is Entertainment by a Gang of Four. So I know uninformed ramblings are what we all come to YouTube for. But this is an album that was on my radar. I'm kind of aware, in the same way as with funk, some of those earliest punk and post-punk bands, bands like Magazine and Wire and stuff like that, has been stuff I've tried to connect with over time. I actually have bought some of those albums, early Wire and Nothing by Magazine. And I'm familiar with I Love a Man in a Uniform from Gang of Four, which was from their third album, Songs of the Free, and I have on a compilation somewhere. It is a lot more polished than the music on here, and this seems to have some of that sort of off-kilter kind of herky-jerky thing that you find in like early Simple Minds, early Echo and the Bunnymen, the earliest Smiths music. But although it's been on my radar for decades and I've read about it, I have the book 1000 Albums to Listen to Before You Die. There's a write-up on it in there. It wasn't until 2021 that I actually picked up this particular copy of it, but I thought it sounded pretty good. You can hear it as a precursor to a band like Franz Ferdinand, somebody who I connected with a little bit more, but again, their earliest stuff from Franz Ferdinand had sort of that herky-jerkiness to them, and I almost started to like them more once they got a little more polished and worked out. So this is a sound that did find itself again, about 20 years later, which is about how these things work. But yeah, I thought it was good. It was interesting. Probably never going to be my favorite record, but I do like, I think the title, Entertainment, is kind of bitterly ironic in the way that some people, myself included, feel about the word content in regards to YouTube. They're a band with something to say, and I'm more aware of that from what I read than I was able to easily decipher lyrics as I was listening to it. So I'm not quite sure exactly what all these songs were about, but they seem to be about consumerism. I don't know, sort of a lack of real meaning. And so I take the title to mean, hey, here's a piece of entertainment. We're trying to say something, but it's just, you're going to take it as stuff to fill your ears here for 35 minutes, in the same way that content feels like it doesn't really matter what it is that's filling up your eyeballs on YouTube, as long as you stay on YouTube, then then it's all good. And so it's interchangeable with anything else. So that's what the title feels like to me, Entertainment. The songs themselves are pretty stripped down and raw. There's an interesting thing. The other song that I had prior to buying this album was Love Like Anthrax, which was on a box set that I had of 70s kind of early punk songs. And on this album, it's the last song. It was re-recorded and apparently retitled just Anthrax, because that's how it's listed here on the album. But Anthrax and Ether, the first song on the album, both have an interesting thing where there's kind of two sets of vocals going on at the same time. That's an interesting sort of back and forth. There's a little bit, I think that there was maybe a Velvet Underground song or two that did that same kind of thing. And this doesn't feel not like the Velvet Underground. It doesn't sound exactly like the Velvet Underground by any stretch, but you can feel that sort of inspiration, more so than something like the Beatles. I will say I found that Essence rare. It's a mouthful of the name of a song. That one really caught my ear. I thought that was a really good song. But Damaged Goods, I know, was a significant song for them. But overall, I thought it was a fine listen. That again, maybe if I knew it in 1979 better. And this is a band that never really scored any hits. They never had any hit records, but they had a lot of very dear to music critics records, and so they show up on lists like 1,000 records, 1,000 albums to listen to before you die, year-end best of lists, best albums of the 70s, best albums of the 80s, best punk rock. They show up on those kinds of lists a lot, even though they never really sold a ton of records, and they are still around in some form, I believe, today. I think that they still put out music now, but I certainly haven't heard any of it. And with that, I'll try not to overstay my welcome with information that I'm not really sure is true, but it's a pretty good example of post-punk music. To some people, it's a great example of it, and my appreciation of it may just have flagged a little bit because I came to it, 30 years later, and 40 years later even. God. So I will take Gang of Four's Entertainment from 1979 and throw that over to Eric, and he will find something in his record collection that relates in some way to this album, and he will make a video about it, show that on Monday. So with that, I guess if you have a guess, put that down in the comments. I think if you just paid close enough attention to the video, it should be readily apparent. You don't really need to do any research whatsoever. So with that, that's all I got to say. So I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.